Hi, this is Larry Bauer. I'm Chief Executive Officer of the Family Medicine Education Consortium, and it's my pleasure today to be talking with Dr. Thomas Rosenthal, a family physician I've known for many, many years. He's an emeritus professor and former chairperson of the Department of Family Medicine in the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at the University in Buffalo, New York. His practice experience includes urban and rural communities, and he authored more than 60 peer-reviewed papers, numerous commentaries, and a monograph on puzzling physical complaints. Dr. Rosenthal also edited the Journal of Rural Health and the textbook Office-Based Geriatrics. He's been honored with local, statewide, and national awards in medical education. Tom, it's great to be talking with you.
Larry, it's great to be talking with you. You've been a good friend for many years and a good friend of family medicine as well as myself.
And we share the connection. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, if you remember, on the south side of Buffalo, went to Canisius College, kind of skipped by the University of Buffalo. But once you became chair there, I did, when I came back home to visit, was able to meet with you there on Grider Street.
Right.
And we had some great conversations. And your department has been a great supporter of the FMEC. So I was so excited when I saw this book come out. The book we're going to talk about today is Bloodletting and Germs, which is just an intriguing title to begin with. So tell me, how did you pick that title as for your book?
Well, on my whole career, I have been collecting tidbits of history of medicine in Western New York and Buffalo area. And, but I kind of connected it through the question I carried of why was bloodletting so common for thousands of years? Hippocrates wrote a thesis on bloodletting and how important it was. Galen reinforced his ideas with his ideas of humors and things. And today it seems so odd to us to even consider bloodletting as a reasonable treatment. On the other hand, when I asked people how they felt after they donated blood, they all said they had a feeling of euphoria for several hours or days after having donated blood. So that curiosity combined with the curiosity about Western New York's role in the history of medicine led me to just a happenstance visit at our little town of Aurora History Museum, where they had a doctor's display of old time medicines and instruments. And they had a diploma, both the original diploma from Vermont and a handwritten copy of that diploma on display in this medicine display. But even the curator for the little museum didn't know why there was a handwritten copy of his diploma. So that led me to Jabez Allen, who practiced in East Aurora, New York from 1834 to 1884. And he seemed like a perfect protagonist to talk about the medical enlightenment. And as it ended up, as I did my research on Jabez Allen and looked at what he studied in his medical college, in fact, he was trained in bloodletting and purging of the bowels. That was really the only therapy they had. And by the time he retired, and he was very active in the local medical society and the AMA, by the time he retired, the germ theory was being accepted. And it was just interesting to consider a 50-year career that goes from bloodletting to germs. And so Jabez became my protagonist, and the way to tell the story of the medical enlightenment.
Great. So I have to tell you, I was intrigued by this. I'm a student of innovation, and I'm watching how new ideas begin, are adopted, and supplant previous ideas or our progress from older ideas. And I'm intrigued by what you've learned about the germ theory as I read your book, which was just a delight to read. As the germ theory began to creep into the practice of medicine, there was significant resistance to that, and a very strong, call it embrace of the old ways of bloodletting and purging. So could you comment on that as you've been, studying that period? What are your observations about um, how science has slowly been adopted in the house of medicine and the resistance to the same?
Well, when you really try to play this transition forward, instead of looking at it from the 21st century backwards, when you play it forward, you realize what a challenge it was to think that these tiny little bugs could possibly cause the range of disease that they cause. Leeuwenhoek reported to the Royal Society way back in 1670s on his findings. Using a direct microscope, a very difficult instrument, he found bugs growing in everything, everywhere he looked, in ponds, the crud between his toes, the stuff he scraped off his teeth. He found bugs everywhere and reported it. But the Royal Society decided to try to figure out where these bugs came from, and tried to prove the theory of spontaneous generation rather than looking at how these bugs actually cause disease. So they spent 2 centuries trying to prove, and then eventually disproving. Pasteur eventually disproved the whole idea of spontaneous generation. And then the cause and effect issues of these bugs maybe causing disease, because they seem to show up every time anybody looked at pus also. As you know, when the ability to put people to sleep and make surgery painless, that really forced people to look at this, because post-operative inflammation, which we now would call infection, but post-operative inflammation killed at least 30% of people that had surgery, even though the surgery became painless. So now somebody really had to figure out why these people were dying. And it seemed, Lister came along and found that if you used antisepsis, he used dilute carbolic acid in order to clean the wounds. You get rid of more of these bugs and you had less inflammation and fewer post-operative deaths. And eventually people had to finally say, well, there's a cause effect here. We've all read about how physicians were so proud of their dirty lab coat or sports coat. Right. The whole idea that a physician could carry a bug that would cause post-operative inflammation or postpartum inflammation was just something that physicians couldn't imagine that they could be the cause. So it's a bit of ego, but it's also a bit of what I think we all still face today, and that's that, we learned it this way. It was hard work to learn it this way. When you tell me something new, you really have to prove it to me. And we know that in modern medicine, it takes 17 years on average for new things to be adopted by all of medicine. That's good and it's bad. But again, going back to the idea of playing it forward, trying to live the 18th century, which is what I tried to do in the book, live through that 19th century to see as germs started showing up in more and more places, as microscopes improved and science took over for the single case review that journals used to have before 1800. In fact, the first randomized controlled trial was actually done on bloodletting, that at least the first one to get published in France, which is at that time one of the centers of medical learning. Pierre Louis actually did bloodletting on patients with pneumonia. And he found out, he randomized patients to one episode of bloodletting on admission or to multiple episodes of bloodletting, which was the recommendation at the time, and found that those that had only one episode of bloodletting were more likely to live. Now, he didn't disprove that bloodletting was not good. I mean, he didn't prove that bloodletting was an adverse phenomena, but he did prove that maybe doing it over and over again was not good. And that began to open up basically the idea of science, the idea of doing controlled trials, the idea of looking at multiple patients over a period of time, the idea of establishing teams between physicians and microscopists and chemists so that they began to talk to each other. And in so doing, the medical journals dramatically changed between 1820 and 1840. And you begin to see that those single opinionated trials, I used this and this patient lived, were being moved to the back of the journals, and the studies, the science was beginning to emerge.
That's really interesting, given the dates that you're just talking about in this country anyways, with the great Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, 1919, there began to be the rapid adoption of, the Flexner's report and the idea that physicians were supposed to be clinician scientists first and foremost, and that was really the highest honor as a physician. And the idea of just going out and taking care of people, that was not less honorable, but less important. So we got that began to get us in trouble in this country. But going back to this period of time, what was it about Jabez Allen as a character that really drew you? I just love the way you've written it. You really make the guy come alive. But
thank you.
So there has to be something there that really was catching your imagination.
Well, I discovered he had a great granddaughter, still alive at that time, in North Carolina. And she had the family Bible that had been passed down. And so she copied the face page and shared the lineage that she knew and the verbal history of the family. She unfortunately passed away during the time it took me to write the book, but she also had, in the book I mentioned that Millard Fillmore had given Jabez's wife a brooch and had given the two of them a teapot, a silver teapot. She had possession of those items in North Carolina. And so she gave me a sense of how the family thought of Jabez, his place in the history. The home that he lived in is still in East Aurora on Main Street. It's now a school. It's a progressive, small high school and private school. And the owner of that school is a retired college professor. And he and I got talking about these things. There were 2 or 3 letters in the History Museum of East Aurora that were written about Jabez. And so I didn't have a lot of detail. I just kind of had these milestones of his life. I knew that his brother had followed him to East Aurora to practice, and I knew that his brother died of cholera. There are several facts that I have. I knew that Jabez took care of Millard Fillmore's daughter when she died of cholera. I know that Jabez published a warning to the residents of East Aurora in 1834 about smallpox that had broken out in the community. So I had these little tiny milestones, and it just seemed perfect to put the story of the evolution of medicine, what I've called the Enlightenment, and I think a lot of people refer to the 19th century as medicine's Enlightenment, together around a community doctor. Now, he truly was a family physician. The stories about him are quite heartwarming. His obituary is a matter of public record, and I do quote that in the epilogue of the book. He obviously was a man that cared about knowing what he was doing and trying to do the best thing, and got involved with his patients.
So I'm curious, Tom, you spent a pretty fair amount of time gathering information, interviewing people. Give us a sense of what was involved.
Well, you're right. It took 4.5 years to put the book together. I don't know that I'm a natural writer of novels. I had never written dialogue before. So there was a lot of it was just, conversations with myself and my computer trying to figure out how to get this right. But the Buffalo Museum of Science had the old handwritten minutes from the Medical Society going way back to 1834, actually 1829. And I was able to sit for hours and hours and hours and read through those and try to figure out physician handwriting, which was as bad in 1834 as it is today.
Some things never change.
Yeah, right. And then I also read the textbooks because I wanted to try to present Jabez's decisions about treatment based on what he had at hand at the time. So I must say that Google having digitalized virtually all old books has really greatly facilitated that. I was able to download books that were published in, the 18th and 19th century, read them in their original text, and have them ready at hand when I needed to look something else up. Then the local director of the Aurora History Museum gave me access to any data that I wanted about the actual history of East Aurora. Jabez's wife was very active in the abolitionist movement and knew the important people in Western New York that dealt with runaway slaves and the abolition movement. So she actually had a track record in history that was about equal to Jabez's. Even though the Underground Railroad, it tends not to document too much because you had to be secret in order to keep going, but nonetheless, she had a track record. So I was able to kind of triangulate all these sources of data around two people that I knew had been very important to East Aurora. And just try to put a story together. The story is a story, it is a novel, but the facts are real. I mean, the people in it, the doctors that show up, Austin Flint, who is the American physician who, Linneck discovered what breath sounds were like and correlated breath sounds with his stethoscope to autopsy findings, but it was Austin Flint that correlated cardiac sounds to autopsy findings. And he started Buffalo Medical School, and he also spent much of his career at Bellevue in New York City, and had published the #1 selling medical textbook in the 1870s. So I had his writing and his source material. There was also one episode of typhoid in a little village called Boston, New York, which I'm sure you're aware of, but
I
most
am,
people
yes.
never heard of. Uh, Actually, it was North Boston, a suburb of the little village of Boston, where a man had come in on a stagecoach in 1843. He didn't feel good. He intended to stay one night in a local tavern in North Boston. He died later that day. Within the next 2 weeks, 10 people had died out of 24 that lived in North Boston from what ended up being typhoid. Well, Jabez's brother by that time was practicing in that area, and Jabez got called to try to help out with this. Jabez knew Austin Flint, who was then in Buffalo, and called Austin Flint down. They investigated this episode of typhoid. It was really one of the first epidemiologic studies done on typhoid, and really differentiated typhoid from other diseases, specifically typhus at the time. And the interesting thing about that then is, as I'm reading all this stuff, and I read John Snow's 1855 treatise on cholera in London, he refers to North Boston and Austin.
Wow.
It's right there. I don't know that anybody ever knew that before, or had been long since forgotten. So with all this discussion, really what I'm just trying to, yeah, it was triangulation. It was bringing lots of sources together to try to tell the story, tell the story of Jabez, but really try to tell the story of medicine through the 19th century. And
So
anchored in with a doctor we might respect and know.
right, I can tell that this brings you great joy.
It has been a great experience.
So if you had to offer advice to others who might want to do something like this, you said it took you 4.5 years to do the work and the writing. What advice might you pass along to others?
Well, that's a good question. There is no substitute for becoming familiar with your material. And anybody that's ever written anything has heard somebody say, you've got to outline it. You do, you have to outline it. If you don't outline it, you end up going in 50 different directions before you get to the end of the page. So you need to outline it. And when you outline it rigorously, you find the holes in your information. And then you have to go off and find those answers. If you want to stay true to your subject and present an accurate and make an accurate representation of what it must have been like, you really need to chase down every little detail. You need to chase down how much did it cost to start a medical practice in 1834? Where did you get the money? How do all these things happen? So I don't know that there was a substitute for writing the kind of book I wrote for time. I think the next one would take me an equal amount of time, frankly.
Any thoughts about a next one?
Well, one of the characters I ran across in this process was Cerenius Chapin, who was a medical college trained doctor, which many doctors were not at the time, but he actually did go to medical college, same as Jabez, and it was the first physician in Buffalo. He died of pneumonia in 1838 that he contracted while trying to make his third invasion of Canada to take over Canada. I'll just read
yes.
a bit. The War of 1812,
yes.
he was imprisoned by the British. He's quite a character, Defended Buffalo from the burning of the British in 1812 with a broken cannon until it finally blew up on him. Quite a character. But he also, he was actually what today we might be called made a saint by the local Indians for the way he took care of everyone. So that may be the next book.
That may be the next one. So
Yeah.
you're in the rumination stage.
I am, yes.
Very cool. So again, speaking to other physician writers, any other words of wisdom, or what's most gratifying about this for you as the author?
Well, things like this, you and I have reconnected around this book. The I have reconnected with dozens of people that I've known very well over the years. We've worked closely together. I've considered them leaders in family medicine, and they read the book, and it's heartwarming to hear their feedback on it. And inevitably, we lead to either a series of emails or a phone conversation saying, I really like this in the book, and how did you get that? It's I've learned. I guess I've learned more about the process of practicing medicine than I thought I would. I mean, I didn't consider bloodletting and purging to be my model, but nonetheless, the whole idea, Jabez still held hands back in 1834. And that's some of the more powerful stories that you hear from family physicians today also. Trying to apply the most modern medicine available while holding a patient's hand is a real privilege.
Yes, it is. And, I'll tell you for myself, and I read some of the reviews from Mike McGill, Howard Rabinowitz, Dan Lasser, all people that I've known and continue to. I had a conversation with Dan just about 2 months ago, I think. But just great people. I'm looking right now at a story that was in the East Aurora Advertiser, and it's got a picture of the intersection with some of the houses that were there. And I can tell you, so for those who don't know about Western New York, it is definitely what they call in New York City upstate, and they're very proud to be a long way away from the big city. They just wished everybody would pay a little more attention to them other than when they have a major snowfall. But East Aurora is actually part of the metropolitan area now. I grew up on the south side of Buffalo. And that was, back in the 50s and 60s. And so East Aurora was the really kind of swanky, if you like, upscale suburb. But I can tell you, Tom, when I go back now to visit, and I still have some family there, I'm going to look for these places and just hopefully, have a chance to walk the space now that I've read the book. I think what you've done is fantastic, and I'm hoping everyone will take the time. It's a great read. Bloodletting and Germs by Dr. Thomas Rosenthal. Tom, any final comments for the audience?
Well, I really appreciate your taking the time to put together this podcast because, what you do put in 4.5 years to write a book, you want people to read it. And so I do hope everyone would enjoy it. I've tried to, the first version of this book was twice as long as the final version. I've really tried to make it efficient for people. And I hope people will comment. My email address and website are in the book, and I'd like to hear from anyone.
And we'll also have that information along with this podcast. And just to say, I think I have that right here. So the website is www.thomasrosenthal, ThomasRosenthal.com. And Tom's email address is trosenth@buffalo.edu. So I'm hoping that people will take the opportunity to read the book and to contact you, and hopefully this will be an opportunity for them to communicate directly, and perhaps it will inspire other people to write some books. And I have to tell you, Tom, one of the projects that we are about to launch through the FMEC is there is no repository right now for books written by family physicians. But I've been, in addition to discovering your book, there are a whole, I'll bet you I found at least 100 books
Yes.
within the last year written by family physicians, novels, all kinds of books, health policy, you name it. And we want to put those on our website and promote them so that people understand the range of thought within the family medicine movement. And what you've contributed here is just a wonderful piece.
Well, thank you, Larry. I do appreciate your attention to this, and certainly you've been one of the people that kept us together over the last many years, and I appreciate that too.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.